"Hi, my name is Orville Darnell, and last week, my granddaughter graduated without ever saying my name. I sat in the back row, wrong seat, wrong name tag, right where they wanted me. They erased me from the tribute video, returned my gift like it was an insult, and when I finally stood to speak, my own daughter told the crowd I was nothing to her. But the worst part wasn't public. It was private years of letters I sent and she never opened, a scholarship I gave under someone else's name, memories I was never allowed to keep. And yet, something shifted. She saw one old video and remembered the scent of cinnamon. So now I ask what happens when the PE, my daughter publicly humiliated me on her graduation day. But my response shocked everyone. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for nearly 3 hours before I dared to open it. It wasn't sealed with a return address I recognized, just a nondescript typeface spelling out Mr. Orville Darnell. That was the first slap. No grandpa, no dad, just a formality that made me feel like a tenant in my own legacy. I broke the seal with a butter knife. Inside was a single sheet, elegantly designed, with gold accents. The heading read, Graceport University Commencement Ceremony. Beneath that, in crisp font, we invite you to attend the graduation of Regina Lystad. Guests may bring one guardian if applicable. One guardian. No mention of me by name. No warmth. Just structure. I sat for a long while, staring at it, thought about calling her, then thought better of it. That's when I dialed Merton. He answered on the second ring. "You got it too." "Huh. Got what, the cold shoulder in formal ink?" He chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "You going? I think I have to," I said. "You sure?" Merton's tone shifted. "I don't want to watch you get hurt again." "Orv, she's still my blood," I said, "and blood doesn't dry easy." Merton paused. "Call me if you need someone to drive you home." That night, I went to the back of my closet, pushed aside my Sunday jackets, and pulled down the small cedar box. The letters were still there, each one returned, unopened, in envelopes with Regina's name, but not her heart. I picked out the least crumpled and tucked it into the new envelope I planned to bring. At the mall the next day, I bought a tie the color of slate and a small silver watch. Had her initials engraved on the back, R.L., just those. Simple. Like the years we used to have, before they turned complicated. Graduation day came cloudy. Spring in Seattle always teetered between promise and regret. I ironed my best shirt, shaved carefully, and arrived early at Graceport University. The security at the gate was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the list. I'm her grandfather," I said plainly. He raised a brow, then radioed someone. A few tense minutes passed before a young woman appeared. "It's fine," she told the guard. "He's listed as secondary." Secondary. The word settled into my ribs. They led me to a seat near the portable toilets at the far back of the lawn. My name tag read, Ronald Howard, Guardian Unknown. I didn't say a word, just sat down, smiled faintly when the usher apologized. He was only doing his job. People poured in around me, families hugging, crying, adjusting their phones to record the big day. I watched them all as if through a pane of glass. Regina appeared eventually, radiant in her gown, her hair swept back like her mother's used to be. Vera stood beside her, beaming like she'd birthed the honor herself. They didn't see me, or maybe they did, and chose not to. I reached into my coat and touched the box with the watch. Still there, still ready. "You'll know I was here," I whispered. The crowd hushed as the ceremony began. A student walked down the aisle, handing out programs. She gave me one with a tight smile. I opened it slowly, scanning for my name in the acknowledgement section. Nothing. I leaned back in the folding chair. My knees ached from the cold metal. But it wasn't the pain I noticed most. Let's see, I muttered to myself, if I'm even in the story. I leaned forward on that cold metal chair, the program shaking lightly in my hand. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like every page carried the weight of something I no longer belonged to. I scanned the family acknowledgement section slowly, line by line, even though I already sensed what I wouldn't find. There they were, Vera Leestad and Charles Allen, her mother and her stepfather. Their names neatly printed in serif font. No Orville Darnell, no grandfather, not even a placeholder, just a white space where legacy should have lived. A soft breeze passed behind me, carrying whispers and laughter from the families gathering closer to the stage. I looked around. Strangers to my left and right, all bundled in spring coats, most of them holding cameras or phones angled toward the front. A woman beside me, about my age, turned and smiled politely. "Which graduate are you here for?" she asked. "My granddaughter," I replied. She nodded, glanced at my name tag, then furrowed her brow slightly. "Ronald, is it?" I followed her eyes down to my chest. The name tag pinned to my blazer read Ronald Howard, Guardian Unknown. I chuckled quietly. "No, just Orville." She smiled again, but it was thinner this time, the kind of smile people offer when they don't know what else to say. I didn't bother to explain. Some errors didn't need correcting. They made their point all on their own. Far in the distance, I saw Regina standing with her professors. Her posture had matured, chin lifted with a quiet confidence. She laughed at something one of them said, hand brushing her hair back like she always used to do when she was proud, but trying not to show it. I stayed in my seat, hidden in the blur of the crowd. From time to time, I hoped she'd turn her head, scan the rows, see me, and not just see, but recognize. But she never did. Instead, she posed for photos with Vera, who had positioned herself at the very edge of the group, just enough to be part of the frame but not so close as to distract. She was always good at that, being visible without being loud. I watched as she straightened Regina's sash, tilted her mortarboard slightly to the right, and then stepped back like she knew where her spotlight ended. The applause started as the school's headmaster walked to the podium. I clapped with everyone else, half-heartedly. My hands were stiff from the morning chill, but I kept them folded tightly on my lap afterward. The gift box in my coat pocket felt like it had doubled in size. I ran my thumb along its edge, feeling the weight of silver and memory. I remembered her first fever, the day I carried her wrapped in a blanket from the car into the ER. I remembered her 5th grade debate final, where she argued that dogs made better pets than cats, citing loyalty and bathroom habits as her strongest points. I remembered the tiny handwritten cards she used to leave in my lunchbox when I worked late at the district office. "You might erase me from paper," I murmured, "but not from memory." I looked back down at the name tag again. Ronald Howard, Guardian Unknown. Maybe I should have said something at the check-in table. Maybe I should have insisted. But what would that change? A tear threatened, but I blinked it back. Not here. Not now. The day wasn't mine. It hadn't been for a long time. Footsteps approached. A young volunteer, clipboard in hand, slowed as she neared my row. She glanced from the list to my tag, then back up at me. "I'm sorry," she began, uncertainty in her voice. "Are you really her grandfather?" I paused, met her eyes, and answered evenly. "I used to be." I sat frozen in that chair, the program limp in my hands. The wind tugged gently at the pages, but I didn't turn them. My eyes were fixed on Regina's name, circled in bold, preparing to be called. I hadn't heard a single word the speaker before. Her said, my mind had drifted. My fingers pressed against the edge of the box in my coat. I could feel its hard corners even through the lining. And just like that, my mind stepped out of the noise and into the silence of 5 days ago. I'd been in the attic again, not for anything urgent, just for stillness. The floorboards creaked like they always did, and dust hung in the air like smoke. That old cardboard box sat where I'd left it years ago, shoved behind Vera's wedding china and a rolled-up rug nobody wanted. Inside were the echoes of a different life crayon drawings, faded birthday cards, one mitten from a pair she never wore. Beneath them, wrapped in a yellowing cloth napkin, was the journal, Regina's, from when she was maybe 10. I'd forgotten I'd kept it. I sat cross-legged on the floor, letting the pages fall open naturally. On one of them, neat, oversized handwriting read, "If I ever graduate, I'll give Grandpa the medal, because he always believed I could." The words hit me in the chest. A medal. That had been her dream when she was still small enough to sit on my shoulders and believe I could fix anything. I closed the journal carefully and set it on my lap. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared at the handwriting, realizing I'd kept something she hadn't even known she'd written for me. That evening, I called Merton. Again. Orv. He sighed when he picked up, like he already knew what I was going to ask. "You know what I'm going to say?" "Yeah," I admitted, "but I'm still asking." He paused. "You're walking into a wall. Man, that girl doesn't see you anymore. That's what makes it harder to stay home." There was silence on the line, then a low, soft chuckle. "You stubborn old mule. Call me when you get back." I didn't answer, just nodded into the quiet and hung up. The next morning, I brought out a fresh envelope from my desk drawer. I slid in the journal, a copy of one of the letters she'd never opened, and a photo Regina in her kindergarten cap, holding a construction paper diploma with glittered glue. I added a short note. "Just so you remember, I was there." I tucked the envelope inside the coat, next to the box with the silver watch. I pressed the fabric flat to make sure it would sit right over my heart. Back in the present, the ceremony hadn't slowed. A tall student in a blue stole was giving some speech about dreams and duty. I watched the families in front of me. They leaned in close to each other, whispered, smiled. A boy rested his head on his father's shoulder. An older couple clutched hands under a shared umbrella. I sat alone, still unseen, still waiting. Then movement. On the stage, faculty shifted in their seats. A new name was announced, and applause swelled. My hands tensed. I didn't have to look at the program again. I knew her name was next. I straightened up slowly, spine protesting. My fingers found the envelope again, steadied themselves there. I whispered, "Here we go." And then she walked to the stage with a smile that once only belonged to me. A hushed excitement swept over the audience as Regina's name echoed from the speakers. My hands gripped the arms of the metal chair not out of pride, but to stop them from shaking. The crowd's applause rose and fell like a wave, and I sat back into the tide, quiet, forgotten, but not gone. The video screens flanking the stage lit up again. I hadn't expected more visuals, but they launched into another montage, a tribute reel for the graduates, one by one. Childhood snapshots, teenage milestones, volunteer trips, sports teams, awards. Each segment had been edited to music, the kind meant to stir nostalgia, gentle piano notes, strings rising with each smile, each family hug, each diploma held up proudly. Then her face appeared, Regina at age 3 in overalls, holding a sandcastle pail. Then 7, missing teeth, a sash across her chest. 11. Perched on a science fair display board. The screen bathed the lawn in her memories, but none of them had me. Her mother was there, Vera, in every third photo, sometimes blurry in the background, sometimes right next to Regina, arms around her shoulders. Then came Charles, the stepfather, standing proudly beside her in a church hallway, beside her soccer trophies, holding her arm at junior prom. There was a picture of Vera kneeling to tie Regina's shoe at age 6. That exact summer, I had taken her every weekend. I taught her to whistle through her fingers and let her bury my wallet in the backyard so she could practice treasure hunts. But in this story, I hadn't existed. A low clapping followed as her segment ended, a few sniffles, proud murmurs from parents around me. I didn't move. That wasn't a careless omission. That was deliberate. It was Vera's voice, polished and persistent, telling an audience this is who matters. This is who was there. My jaw clenched, and I steadied my breath. I didn't need a photo to prove I raised her. I had the memories buried in me deeper than any frame on a screen. I stared at the ground, and then, unbidden, I heard it again. Vera's voice, not from the video, but from a phone call weeks ago. She'd called under the pretense of clarity. If you insist on coming, she had said, just sit quietly. Don't make a scene. Orville. That had been her tone. Not cruel, not overt, just firm enough to say, you no longer fit. And she was right. I hadn't been invited to be part of this day. I'd been tolerated like a forgotten relative at a funeral present, but invisible, just so no one could say they hadn't sent the notice. Back on stage, the MC cleared his throat and called out Regina's name once more. The silence that followed was brief, but reverent. She appeared at the foot of the stairs and climbed slowly. Her gown shimmered under the sun, her cap tilted just enough to show she had style, but didn't need to shout. She beamed. Vera rose to her feet in the front row, clapping with a precision that felt choreographed. Charles stood next to her, his arm lightly resting on her back. They were the image of unity, of a story whole and clean. I rose halfway from my chair, and I stopped. No one turned to look at me. No cameras panned my way. No eyes searched the rows in hope or memory. So I sat back down. My hand found the envelope in my coat again. The one with the picture, the note, the childhood journal. Its corners were bent now, warm from my body. It was the only place in the world still carrying my version of Regina. She reached the podium, adjusted the mic. A hush fell again. I saw her scanning the audience. For a moment, she looked out over the heads, across the long stretch of chairs, toward the back. Our eyes didn't meet. And then she spoke. I want to thank my real family, those who never abandoned me. I didn't flinch. But inside, something final snapped. I didn't flinch. But inside, something final snapped. The applause still echoed in the air, light and polite, like raindrops tapping against a sealed window. I sat frozen. Regina stood on that stage, beaming, soaking in the warmth she believed she had earned alone. My hands, resting on my knees, twitched slightly as I exhaled slowly. To those who stood by me, even when it was inconvenient, she had said, "That's who my real family is." My name was never spoken. I was never even implied. I looked around. No one noticed the omission. They clapped. Vera's hands came together in delicate, calculated rhythm, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Her husband leaned in to whisper something in her ear. I didn't need to guess what. My fingers brushed against the box inside my coat pocket. Still there. Still unopened. Not for them. Anyway. At the far edge of the lawn, near a cluster of student-made signs and colorful balloons, stood a table beneath a banner, "Messages to the Graduates." It was draped in white linen, decorated with sunflowers and thick black pens, small cards laid out like a garden of unspoken words. I waited until the crowd's focus shifted back to the next speaker. Then I stood. The short walk across the lawn felt longer than it was. I kept my gaze low, eyes trained on the grass so I wouldn't catch any stares. No one stopped me. I slipped the envelope into the glass box like it belonged there. Like I belonged. For Regina. I had written, "No return address." Just my name on the back in steady handwriting. As I turned to go, I noticed someone, a volunteer, maybe glancing my way, but they said nothing. I thought I'd gone unnoticed. I returned to my seat. The one next to me, marked "Reserved," still sat empty. For who? I didn't know. Or maybe I did. With hands that now trembled a little less, I pulled out a second envelope from my coat. This one didn't belong in a keepsake box. This one needed to sit where I had sat, where I had been made invisible. I placed it gently on the empty chair beside me. I smoothed it once and let my fingers linger on the paper. Written in bold black ink, "To Regina." From the man you chose not to see? I didn't look up. I didn't need to. The weight of the paper held more than a name. It held a presence, a declaration. I adjusted the envelope upright, angled perfectly so she couldn't miss it if she ever looked. Inside was a letter I had written weeks ago. I hadn't changed a word. "You wore braces when you were 9. You hated carrots, but you ate them when I called them rabbit snacks. You cried the first time we watched Charlotte's Web, and you made me promise never to read it to you again. I was there the day you lost your first tooth. I was there when you forgot your lines at the school play, and I whispered them from the front row. You may not remember me as part of this story, Regina, but I lived every line of it. I had folded that letter carefully, tucked it between old snapshots of her in kindergarten and a worn ribbon from a county spelling bee. Things she'd left in my house, forgotten like she'd forgotten me. And still, I remembered. As I walked away from the chair, I didn't expect her to notice. I didn't expect tears or apologies. I just needed the truth to have a place at the table, even if it was a silent one. Near the edge of the reception garden, I found a bench, half in shadow. I sat down, adjusting my coat. The laughter of graduates rang behind me, shiny shoes, sparkling dresses, clinking glasses. None of them noticed the man sitting alone, watching the party from a quiet corner. I looked once more toward the seat I had left behind. Someone bent over. A hand reached toward the envelope. I never intended for it to be found that quickly, but perhaps life has its own rhythm, one that ignores intention altogether. I watched from the edge of the garden as guests began to move like schools of fish, flowing between conversations and glasses of punch. Their laughter rang in spurts, sharp and sudden. No one looked at me. No one asked. The envelope I left on the chair remained upright for a while, until the breeze turned it slightly. A few students walked past, talking about summer internships and cross-country trips, their excitement unbothered by the weight of lives unraveling in silence. Then came the tap on my shoulder, Sir A student worker, his red name badge crooked and sweating in the heat. He held out a small wrapped box, the kind you'd find in a jeweler's case. My breath caught. "This was returned," he said simply. I took it without a word. The box was unmistakable cream paper, gold ribbon I had tied myself. I nodded my thanks. The boy lingered a second, then, sensing I had nothing more to say, turned and melted into the crowd. I sat down on the garden's far bench. The same one I'd occupied earlier, back when I thought the worst of this day had already passed. Slowly, I undid the ribbon. My fingers worked deliberately, gently. The paper loosened, revealing the watch inside, silver, polished, with her initials engraved in script on the underside. There was a card tucked into the lid, folded once. Thank you, but unnecessary. That was it. No love. Regina. No signature. Just the message, neat and cool, as if typed by a stranger at a front desk. I closed the box, placed it beside me. My hands trembled briefly, but then I stopped them. I reached inside my coat and pulled out the envelope. Not the one for ceremony, not the letter of regret. This one was heavier, thicker. It had been with me for weeks, not for a moment like this, but for something deeper. I opened it. Inside were copies of child support checks, never cashed, letters returned unopened, holiday cards that came back marked moved, no forwarding address, photos from recitals, soccer games, her 7th birthday, each one annotated on the back in my hand 2012, after school pickup, first solo at church, science fair, 2nd place. They were pieces of a presence no one wanted to admit. The crowd near the stage grew louder. A toast was being raised. I stood, brushed off my coat, and walked toward the open mic area. It wasn't formal, more of a courtesy, a chance for family to say a few words. I hadn't signed up. I didn't need to. A man had just finished a speech about his niece's determination. The mic was announced as open. I didn't hesitate. I walked forward. Conversations dimmed as I approached. A staff member lifted the mic from its stand and offered it to me with a surprised look. Name: Sir Orville Darnell, I said clearly. There were murmurs. A few faces turned. Vera, across the lawn, sipping champagne, paused. Her hand dropped to her side, the glass still full. I stepped up. I won't take long, I began. My voice was steady, not loud, not trembling, just real. I pulled a few sheets from the envelope, holding them loosely. I was never missing. I said, I was just kept outside the frame. I paused. A few heads tilted. One man lowered his phone. These, I continued, are not accusations. They're memories I wasn't allowed to be part of. I lifted a photo, the science fair one. This was the night she lost. She thought she'd failed. We stopped for milkshakes and made up award certificates out of notebook paper, another her on my shoulders in the front yard. She once said I was taller than the sky. I kept that sentence for years. I let the crowd look, not to convince them, but to document it existed. I folded the pages, tucked them back into the envelope, and said one last thing. I'm not here to take anything, just to leave this. So the record, at least, is complete. No one clapped. No one booed. They simply stared. As I stepped off the platform, I walked to the nearby table covered in congratulatory cards and floral centerpieces. I laid the envelope down carefully among them. The breeze caught one edge, fluttering it open slightly, revealing the photo of the milkshake night. I turned and walked away. Somewhere behind me, I heard footsteps pause. Regina's head had turned. I didn't wait to see if she would come after me, but I knew something shifted in that moment. I stepped away from the table, the weight of that manila envelope gone from my hands but heavy on my chest. I could feel eyes tracking me, not out of concern, but discomfort. A few people nodded politely, then looked away, as though they might catch some sort of grief by standing too close. I took a seat near the refreshment table, far enough from the center to be forgotten, close enough to hear murmurs travel like ripples in a still pond. A tray of mini quiches and champagne flutes shimmered under a canopy of string lights. somewhere behind me. I heard someone whisper my name and then stop mid-sentence, or maybe they'd never said it at all. Vera stood across the garden, glass in hand, as composed as ever. Her back was straight, her dress the color of expensive regret. She didn't flinch. Her smile, small and measured, was the kind that says everything without saying a word. But her jaw was tight, pulsing just beneath the cheekbone. A few minutes later, a man took the mic to give a toast, joking about how fast kids grow and how few of them call home. There was polite laughter. Then a shift in tone as the MC announced. And now, a few words from our honored graduate, Regina Lystad. My granddaughter walked toward the mic with a grace she didn't inherit from me. She adjusted it, smoothed the front of her gown, and looked out over the sea of faces. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me," she said, her voice calm, her smile rehearsed. "Everyone who supported me, not only when it was easy, but especially when it wasn't." There was a pause, a long one. I felt the collective breath of the crowd stall. "And that man," she gestured subtly, "has nothing to do with my life. Please respect my space." No one clapped. Not immediately. Not this time. Then, a smattering of applause. Polite, uncertain. Vera closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were gleaming with approval, not of the words, but of the control. Regina had chosen her stage, her narrative, and she had edited accordingly. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I kept my gaze fixed on the horizon just beyond the reception tent. I saw her smile, the one she used to give me when I picked her up from piano practice, when I found her missing mittens in the laundry basket, when we watched her favorite animated movie for the 100th time because she said the pig reminded her of me. That smile had always been mine. Now, it belonged to the crowd. And still, I didn't let it crack me open. I let it pass through me like a cold wind. I was tired of breaking. As the crowd reshuffled again, a man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a faculty badge clipped to his jacket, approached. He didn't introduce himself. He simply stood beside me for a moment, then leaned in. "She used to talk about you," he whispered. "Before college, all the time." I turned to him. He nodded gently. "Used to say you made the best grilled cheese this side of the Cascades." A chuckle escaped me, short, involuntary. It almost hurt. "She stopped bringing you up after freshman year," he added. "Didn't think it was my place to ask." I nodded once, more out of gratitude than agreement. It was enough. A thread, however faint, that something had once been real, and maybe still was, buried under layers of shame and rewriting. The man gave my shoulder a squeeze before disappearing back into the crowd. Then came Vera. She passed by slowly, deliberately. Her heels clicked on the flagstone like punctuation marks. As she neared, she leaned in not with warmth, but with warning. "You made your point," she said under her breath, voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Now don't ruin what she's built." I didn't rise to it. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. I never wanted to ruin anything. I replied, "Just not be erased." She paused. A flash of something hesitation, perhaps flickered in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She straightened and walked off. I stayed there by the refreshment table. A waiter set down a new tray beside me, looked around, then leaned in. "They asked me to keep you in the back," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, sir." I didn't argue. I just took a glass of water and looked at the sky waiting for it to rain. I didn't argue. I just took a glass of water and looked at the sky waiting for it to rain. But the clouds held back, just like everything else today. I stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in my pockets, staring at the neatly trimmed hedges bordering the lawn. The laughter had dimmed, replaced by a thrum of awkward civility. Conversations clipped, glances flicked sideways. And still, something inside me had stilled, not because I felt closure, no, but because the weight of staying silent was finally shared with the air around me. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't begged, I'd simply told the truth. A small gasp across the way pulled my attention. I turned slightly. Regina stood near a white balloon arch. Her cap was off now, gown slightly unzipped at the back. She was mid-conversation with a man in a gray suit, but her eyes weren't on him. They were on me. For the first time that day, she didn't look through me. We locked eyes. It lasted no more than 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I saw it uncertainty, maybe even guilt, a twitch in her cheek, a shallow breath, and then she turned away. Not quickly enough to hide it. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't chase it. A voice interrupted. The event MC, back on the small stage, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, before we close today's program, we have a special segment prepared by the planning committee, a little something to celebrate the journey we've all taken from childhood to this moment. Guests murmured, some clapped lightly. A projector screen rolled down with a hum, and the first image blinked onto the canvas, a toddler in oversized sunglasses, falling into a kiddie pool. Laughter rippled. I stayed seated. Clips played, baby teeth, smiles, backyard birthday parties, hand-drawn art displayed with refrigerator magnets. One by one, graduates as children. Some sang, some danced, some hugged their moms or dogs or teddy bears. And then came her, Regina, age 7, in a polka dot dress, hair a little uneven from her last haircut. She was in a living room I recognized instantly, my living room. The camera was slightly tilted. I must have been the one holding it. She ran into the frame, holding a paper rose. "Grandpa always brings me roses," her tiny voice said. She giggled and waved at the camera. "He smells like cinnamon rolls." A beat later, I stepped into the frame, only half visible, arms open. She jumped into them. There was a hush across the lawn. No one clapped this time. They didn't need to. I heard Vera's breath catch. She hadn't expected that. I doubt Regina had either. The image lingered longer than the others. Maybe it was unedited. Maybe someone on the committee didn't know the full story or knew just enough. When the video ended, the screen faded to black. A few guests whispered. I saw shoulders shift. Eyes glance my way. No one spoke. I stayed seated. My fingers rested on my knees. My throat tightened. But I didn't cry. I couldn't. "You remembered once," I whispered to myself. "That's enough for now." Applause came scattered and half-hearted, not out of disrespect, but disorientation. The air had changed. The MC thanked everyone, his voice thinner now, uncertain. People began to disperse. Feet shuffled on the grass. The smell of melting frosting from a nearby cake table mingled with perfume and afternoon humidity. And yet, she didn't move. Regina stood facing the screen, unmoving. Vera said something to her and gestured, but she didn't respond. Just one step, just one toward me. Then she stopped. I didn't expect her to run to me, but I didn't expect her to stay frozen either. Evening crept in quietly. The courtyard lights flickered on, casting warm halos over the cobblestone. Most guests had already left, their voices trailing into the parking lot, laughter fading behind closing car doors. The smell of damp grass clung to the air as the sky shifted from soft lavender to deep gray. I sat near the fountain, hands folded in my lap. Its water burbled gently, out of sync with the thudding silence around me. I didn't feel cold, but I felt everything else, years pressing on my chest, memories rising uninvited. Then, out of nowhere, a small pair of shoes stopped in front of me. A girl no older than 6, maybe 7, tilted her head. Her eyes were wide, curious, unafraid. I recognized her from earlier, clinging to the leg of one of the catering staff. She asked, in the kind of voice only children manage to hold with such disarming clarity, "Are you sad?" I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't trust my voice. But I smiled gently, gave her the truth she could understand. "Not right now," I said. She nodded as if that made perfect sense, then skipped off, her ponytail swinging behind her, at the far end of the courtyard. Regina stood just outside the main doors. She hadn't left with Vera. She hadn't even moved. I saw her lift a hand to adjust her gown, but her eyes never left the courtyard. I didn't move. Neither did she. Vera reappeared briefly, said something low to her. I couldn't hear the words, but the sharp gesture was unmistakable. Regina didn't respond. Vera walked away alone. Rain came softly, like someone turning down the volume on the world. I looked up as the first drop touched my cheek. I didn't bother wiping it off. Others dashed for cover, high heels tapping quickly on stone, laughter replaced by shrieks about the weather. But I stayed. The rain trickled through my collar, down my back. I closed my eyes, let it soak into the fabric, into my skin. It didn't hurt. It felt honest, like the kind of truth that doesn't need to be explained. Then my phone buzzed. I hesitated before reaching for it. My fingers were damp as I pulled it from my coat pocket. A single message, from an unknown number. I remember the roses. No name. But there didn't need to be one. I read it twice. My heart didn't race. My eyes didn't sting. I didn't smile. I just placed the phone back in my pocket and stood. The rain had picked up a little. People were almost gone now. I walked slowly, not bothering to shield myself. The parking lot shimmered under the streetlights, slick with puddles. At the edge of the lot, I paused, looked back. That building behind me, the place I'd once entered unseen, now sat quiet under a sky that had finally cried for me. I existed in one memory again. That was enough. I reached for my keys. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not running, not calling, just soft, steady. I turned. Regina stood about 30 feet away, rain glossing her hair, her shoes soaked through. She didn't speak. In her hand, something white, an envelope. I didn't speak first. I wanted to see what she would do when no one was watching. I didn't speak first. I wanted to see what she would do when no one was watching. She didn't leave. We stood there in the fading light, barely 30 feet apart, neither of us crossing it. The drizzle had slowed to a fine mist, the kind that lingers like a whisper, clinging to our skin and clothes. The distant hum of engines and low conversation echoed across the lot, but in that space between us, the world was utterly still. Regina didn't fidget. She didn't cry, but she didn't walk away either. Her arms hung at her sides, rain flattening strands of her hair against her cheek. I could see the hesitation in her stance, like someone leaning toward a decision they hadn't rehearsed. Then she spoke, not loud, not soft, just enough to travel across the wet pavement. "Was it really you who paid for my second year at Columbia?" I didn't flinch, just nodded once. "Yes." She exhaled, not quite a sigh, but something close. "Why didn't you ever tell me I took a beat? Because you would have sent the check back like the others." She looked down. Her shoes shifted slightly on the damp concrete. I didn't say more. I had said all I needed when I wrote the check. Silence stretched between us again, But it wasn't the angry kind this time. It was searching, holding. Regina reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered. Then she held it up so I could see. A social media post, just uploaded minutes earlier. A photo of me from earlier today seated alone, watching the childhood tribute video, my face lit by the screen. The caption read, "He never clapped." But he never looked away either. Below it, thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. Who is he? Someone tell this man's story. I want to hug him, and I don't even know him. Regina stared at the phone, then lowered it. Her voice wavered. You were in the room, and I didn't see you. But they did. I didn't answer. There wasn't a reply that would have meant more than that sentence. She reached into her purse again slower this time and pulled out a thin folder. I recognized the university seal. I got this a week ago, she said. Didn't look at the donor name until today. She opened it, fingers shaking slightly, and read aloud, "The Orville Darnell Legacy Award." I held my breath, not from pride, but from the ache of knowing it took paperwork for her to hear my name without bitterness. Her eyes stayed on the page, even as her voice grew quiet. I thought it was a coincidence. No, I said, it wasn't. She let the folder close. A breeze rustled the paper as she tucked it back into her bag. For a moment, we both just stood there. I didn't move closer. I didn't dare assume that permission. But then she stepped forward, not much, just one small motion. I can't promise anything, she said. Not yet. Not after everything. I nodded. That's all I ever asked. Just to not be erased. She looked up. You weren't. Not completely. The rain had stopped. Just like that. Only the soft drip of trees around the lot marked its passing. We stood in silence again. But this time it felt less like a wall and more like a bridge. A shaky, fragile one. Behind her, headlights approached. Vera's car rolled slowly into view. The tires crunched over the wet gravel, stopping a few feet behind Regina. The horn sounded one sharp, impatient note. Regina didn't turn around. I waited, unsure. Then she took another step toward me, not enough to close the gap, but enough to say she might one day. End of chapter 10. I watched her take one more step toward me, not enough to close the distance, but enough to say she might one day. The next morning, my phone buzzed just after sunrise. My eyes, still foggy with sleep, squinted at the screen. A message from an unknown number. Coffee at the lakeside place. 9 a.m. Just us. Regina. I stared at it for a long while. The lake cafe she mentioned was quiet, out of the way, the kind of spot where small conversations could ripple wide. I typed yes and hit send, my fingers trembling more than they should have. Hope and fear swirled in my chest like cream in black coffee. At 8:52, I was already seated, facing the lake, the breeze tugging lightly at my coat. I heard the door chime behind me and turned as Regina entered, no makeup, hair tied back, a denim jacket I remembered buying her once in high school. She ordered green tea without looking at the menu. I asked for coffee, black. We sat across from each other, the wooden table a country's width between us. She toyed with her spoon. I folded my hands. I don't know where to begin. She said, anywhere is fine. I replied, I've waited decades. There was a pause. No birds chirped. No cups clinked. Just breath and silence. She took a sip of her tea. Did you ever stop writing? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and pulled out a folded, yellowing letter. The ink was faded. The date at the top, May 2013. I just stopped mailing them. I said. She looked at it. Didn't reach for it. Didn't turn away. I thought they were gone. Vera said they must have been lost or meaningless. They were never meaningless. I said, still no tears, just listening. Her silence wasn't cold this time. It was porous, taking it all in. She placed her cup down with both hands, then spoke, voice softer. I left the house last night without telling Vera. I raised my eyebrows. She still doesn't know I read all your letters. I found them in the attic when I was packing for college. And you didn't say anything. Then I didn't know what to do with them, she said. They made everything more complicated. I nodded. You don't need to pick sides. Just remember who you are. She looked down, her fingers tracing the lip of her cup. I think, for a long time, I only saw you through other people's words, not yours. I didn't speak. The wind did. The conversation drifted, never settling on one topic. No dramatic revelations. No sudden apologies. But there was warmth, like a stove just turned on. Not yet boiling, but definitely working. She reached across the table, hesitant. Her hand rested over mine. I'm not ready to call you Dad, she said, but I'm ready to listen. My throat tightened. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. We sat like that for a while. Nothing extravagant, just skin on skin. Decades of grief condensed into contact. At 10:15, she glanced at her watch, then grabbed her purse. As we stood, she adjusted her jacket and looked me square in the eye. I want to come by the house next weekend, she said. Alone. I nodded slowly, the corner of my mouth lifting not wide, not fully. But I smiled. End of chapter 11. I smiled not wide, not fully, but I smiled. The knock came at precisely 3:00 p.m. As promised. No doorbell, just the soft, deliberate rap of knuckles. I didn't hurry. Instead, I let the silence linger a moment longer, anchoring myself. When I opened the door, she was there, Regina, in jeans, a slate gray hoodie, no makeup, hair pulled back. She held a rectangular tin box against her chest like it was something sacred. You said you saved everything, she said. I stepped aside without a word, letting the screen door creak open. She followed me past the living room, down the short hallway that still smelled faintly of cedar. At the end, the old guest room stood once reserved for visiting friends, now a quiet museum. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, each carefully arranged. Books on one side, photo frames on the other. A corner cabinet of glass housed the pressed roses, dozens of them, faded and dried, each tagged with a year and occasion. Regina stepped in, her gaze lingering on every inch. Her fingers brushed the spine of a children's book she once adored. On a central shelf sat a collection of unopened envelopes, neatly stacked. She didn't speak, just stood, absorbing it all. After a few moments, she moved to the small desk by the window and placed the tin box on top. The latch popped softly. Inside were torn pieces of an old letter, faded ink, jagged edges, each segment carefully reassembled and taped along the back. She pulled one sheet from the bundle and began to read aloud, her voice thin but steady. I hope your future is filled with people who see you fully, as I always have. I didn't move. My hands stayed folded behind my back. She let the letter fall back into the box and turned toward a framed photograph on the wall, her and me at the county fair. She on my shoulders, both of us laughing, her face smeared with cotton candy. I used to remember this, she said, before I was told not to. She faced me now. I know it doesn't fix things, but I'd like to come back next week. Dad. I flinched, not visibly. I hoped. That word Dad rang through the room like a bell I hadn't heard in years. We said nothing for a long stretch after that. She sat on the small love seat, while I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of tea. Earl Grey, the kind she used to steal sips of when she was too young to like it. We drank in silence, only the ticking wall clock filling the air. As the sun began to dip, the room glowed with late afternoon gold. She stood, stretched slightly, then moved toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "Thank you for waiting." I met her eyes. "You were worth it." She nodded once, then left. I returned to the rose room and sat at the desk. From the drawer, I pulled out a fresh envelope, a blank sheet of stationery, and began to write, not to mail, not to save, but to hand over next week. When the ink dried, I stood and pinned a small photo to the wall, one Regina had taken earlier that afternoon, with her phone, the two of us, sitting quietly, tea in hand, the roses behind us. Underneath, I scribbled the date. The day silence broke.